Texas, 1881. The sun fell heavy over the endless horizon, painting the dry plains in strokes of fire and dust. On the edge of a small forgotten town, a rancher named Thomas Hale lived in silence of his own, widowed too young, hardened by work, and carrying the weight of loneliness heavier than any saddle he had ever lifted. He thought the only company he could afford was a horse, strong enough to pull the plow and outrun coyotes that haunted his cattle at night. So when he rode into town one morning to meet a horse trader, he expected nothing more than a bargain. But life, as it often does in the Wild West, had other plans. At the back of the saloon, in the haze of whiskey and cheap laughter, stood a thin young woman with eyes like storm clouds. She was not speaking, not resisting, simply staring into the wood floor as though the world had already abandoned her. The trader, a drunk with debts clinging to his shadow, spat and said, "She ain't worth much. Deaf, cursed, won't speak. Take her or leave her." Thomas had come for a horse, yet when he looked at her, something stirred deep in his chest. Without thinking, he laid his payment on the table, not for a horse, but for her freedom. The town whispered as Thomas led her away, calling him a fool for bringing home a broken girl. They said she was deaf, cursed, and useless on a ranch. She moved like a ghost across the land, her silence louder than the wind. She never answered questions, never sang with the church, never laughed with the children who teased her in the street. But on stormy nights, when lightning cracked across the sky, Thomas noticed her turning her head toward the sound, flinching as though she could hear. And when the cattle stirred before a storm, she would run to the barn before the first drop of rain. Slowly, he began to wonder if she was truly deaf, or if her silence carried secrets no one cared to understand. One winter, sickness spread across the town like wildfire. Families grew weak, children cried in fever, and the church bell tolled too often. Thomas himself collapsed one night, his body burning with fever, the ranch slipping from his grasp. But it was the silent woman who nursed him, her hands steady, her eyes unafraid. She stayed by his side for days, whispering words he thought he imagined in the haze. Her name, he finally learned, was Clara. She told him how her father had sold her after years of cruelty, how silence had been her only shield, how people judged her without ever knowing the truth. And in that lonely ranch house, Thomas discovered something he had forgotten: trust. He no longer saw her as the girl bought in a saloon, he saw her as the woman who saved his life, who heard storms before the sky spoke, who understood the language of the heart without needing words. The town didn't change overnight. Whispers still followed them, but Thomas and Clara built their own world beyond the fences and dust. They worked the land together, side by side. In the evenings, when the fire crackled, she read aloud from the worn Bible she kept hidden, her voice soft but steady. And when the first flowers of spring pushed through the hard soil, Thomas knew love had returned to his life, not with noise or grand promises, but with the quiet strength of a woman who taught him that sound is not the only way to listen. Love, in that rugged land, did not arrive with gunfire or songs, it arrived in silence, in patience, in the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat together. And so the lonely rancher who went to town for a horse found something far greater, a partner, a healer, a love that spoke without words yet echoed louder than any storm across the Wild West.